One man, the most powerful office on earth. And he just admitted on camera he has no idea what he's doing. Not a political opponent saying that. Not a reporter. Not a critic. Him. His own words. His own mouth. I don't know. I can't tell. Depends what they do. That's the President of the United States, talking about whether America is going to war with Iran or ending one. And if that doesn't stop you cold, I don't know what will. Because what's happening right now is unlike anything we've seen in modern American history, and most people still don't fully understand the scale of it. Let's start with what actually happened. In a recent interview, President Trump was asked a very simple, very direct question. Are we winding this down with Iran, or are we escalating? And his answer was exactly this. I don't know. I can't tell. Depends what they do. That's it. That's the answer. From the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military. But then, in the very same breath, he described what happens if Iran doesn't comply. No bridges. No power plants. Quote, Stone Ages. Now here's what makes this so extraordinary. Just days before that statement, the messaging from the White House was almost the complete opposite. The war was winding down. Progress was being made. Things were moving in a positive direction. And then suddenly, Stone Ages. So within the span of just a few days, the official position of the United States government swung from "we're close to a resolution" to "we will bomb you" into the Stone Ages. And the person making those statements cannot explain which one reflects actual policy, because he himself doesn't know. And somewhere in the middle of all this whiplash, Trump mentioned he gave Iran a deadline. Then he extended it. Then extended it again, because, and I want you to hear this directly, I thought it was inappropriate the day after Easter. I want to be a nice person. That is not strategy. That is not negotiation. That is chaos. And the American public deserves to understand exactly how dangerous this kind of chaos is on the world stage. When your adversaries cannot predict your next move, not because you're playing smart, calculated chess, but because you yourself have no idea what comes next, that is not strength. That is a national security liability. Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz for a second, because this matters enormously. Trump claimed just days earlier that the strait would, quote, open naturally. Then on Easter Sunday, he went on a profanity-filled rant about the very same strait. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points in the entire global oil supply. Roughly 20% of the world's oil moves through it. The moment that waterway becomes genuinely unstable, gas prices spike, supply chains tighten, and economies, including ours, feel that pressure almost immediately. This is not abstract. The consequences of this kind of erratic foreign policy land directly on working American families. And this is why it matters who is covering it. Because if you are relying on a media organization that has already bent the knee to this administration, that has settled lawsuits to avoid conflict, that has softened its coverage to protect corporate relationships, that has gutted its newsroom to cut costs, then you are not getting the full picture. You are getting a managed version of reality. And in a moment like this, a managed version of reality is genuinely dangerous. That's why independent media exists. That is why platforms like this one exist. Not to tell you what to think, not to pick a team and root for it, but to report what is actually happening, without fear, without corporate interference, and without a pre-approved narrative handed down from above. And speaking of that, I want to introduce you to someone who understands this from the inside out. Scott McFarland spent 25 years in legacy media, the last 5 of those at CBS News. He is an award-winning investigative journalist. He covered the January 6th prosecutions in extraordinary depth. And a few days ago, he made the decision to leave all of that behind and join us here at Midas Touch as our chief Washington correspondent. Now, I want you to understand what that means, because walking away from your childhood dream is not a small thing. Scott grew up wanting to be on a network television newscast. That was the goal, and he achieved it. He was there. And then he looked around and made a very honest, very clear-eyed assessment of what legacy media has become and what it is no longer capable of being. Here's what he told me. Waiting until 6:30 in the evening to tell people the news is an idea from 1996. It doesn't belong in this world. If you have information that matters to people, you get it out immediately, across every platform available, to as many people as possible. That's not a radical idea. That's just logic. But legacy media, for the most part, is still doing the theatrical production, the theme music, the shiny studio walls, the teleprompter, the preordained format, and audiences are leaving. Trust is eroding. And the organizations that built that trust over decades are actively destroying it by cutting the very people and resources that made them credible in the first place. And Scott made a point that I think is worth sitting with. You do not grow by cutting. You grow by investing. Independent media right now is investing in people, in time, in resources, in storytelling. Legacy media is doing the opposite. And audiences can feel that difference. They can feel when someone has put real effort into bringing them the truth. And they can feel when someone is just going through the motions with a shrinking budget and a fearful editorial environment. There's something else Scott said that really stayed with me. People don't want their news performed at them. They don't want the bells and whistles and the theatrical presentation that feels, at this point, almost impersonal. They want someone to look directly into the camera and say, here's what happened today. Here's why it matters to your life and your family's life. Straight. Clear. No performance. No agenda. Just the facts. Explain like you're talking to another adult who deserves the full picture. And that's actually harder than it sounds. Because you can commit to fact-based reporting and still make choices about what you platform and what you don't. You can be completely dedicated to truth and still refuse to amplify conspiracy theories, lies, or the deliberate whitewashing of history. If a president consistently lies about a past election or misrepresents the events of January 6th, the job of a journalist is not just to fact-check it after the fact. The job is to not let that misinformation poison the well in the first place. That's not opinion. That's editorial responsibility. Now, I want to talk about something Scott mentioned that I think a lot of people either don't know or don't fully appreciate, and that is what it's actually like to cover this administration as a journalist. Because it's not just uncomfortable. In some cases, it's actively hostile. When Scott left CBS, the White House Communications Office, the official communications office of the United States government, publicly mocked his career change on social media. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt commented on it. The White House itself took time out of its day to ridicule a journalist for leaving one outlet and joining another. Think about what that tells you. The White House is monitoring individual journalists closely enough to comment on their career moves in real time. And rather than being a warning, Scott said, and I agree with him completely, that kind of attention is validating. If you are irrelevant to this administration, they ignore you. If they're watching you that closely, you are asking the right questions and doing the right work. Scott also covered the January 6th prosecutions for 5 years. More than 1,500 people, many of whom admitted to attacking police officers, to storming their own government, and plenty of them were not shy about harassing the reporters covering their cases. Online, at the courthouse, in person. Scott has been dealing with that level of hostility for years. He has developed thick skin. And he made a point that I think is really important. If covering a story isn't drawing any heat, you might want to ask yourself whether it's actually the right story to be covering. But here's what I really want to emphasize about Scott's approach, and honestly about what we're trying to do here more broadly. Refusing to take partisan sides is not the same as refusing to acknowledge reality. Reporting the facts does not mean treating every claim as equally valid. There are things that are true and things that are false. There are events that happened and events that didn't. There are statements that are accurate and statements that are lies. A journalist's job is to make that clear, not to split the difference down the middle and call it balance. And there are stories in Washington right now that are genuinely not getting enough attention. The courts have been one of the most significant checks on this administration, a real firewall against a number of executive actions. That story deserves more coverage than it's getting. Federal employees who have quit or blown the whistle from inside the administration, those people deserve to be heard. And Congress, specifically the minority, has been more active and more newsworthy than minorities in Congress typically are. Democrats have pushed the Epstein issue with real results. They've launched their own investigations without subpoena power. These are stories. Real stories. And too many journalists are spending their time chasing the hourly Truth Social post, instead of finding what hasn't been reported yet. There are not enough journalists in Washington, D.C. right now. And the ones who are there are stretched thin, under-resourced, and in some cases working inside organizations that have already compromised their editorial independence.
That's the reality.
And that's exactly why what we're doing here matters. We're not going anywhere. We're going to keep reporting on the war with Iran, whatever that turns out to be. We're going to keep covering the courts, the whistleblowers, the Congress, the executive overreach. We're going to keep bringing in people like Scott McFarland who have the skills, the experience, and the commitment to do this work the right way. And we're going to keep doing it without bending the knee to anyone.